Hello everyone, my name is Prashant. I'm working as a MuleSoft architect. So in our previous session, we have seen how to do a designing of an API. And after that, we have also seen how to implement an existing API. So in this today's session, we'll see how to develop an integration in depth. Okay, so let's click on this develop an integration option. So it will ask you for some details to get started before this. And it will basically ask you for the project name. So let's add some meaningful project name. So I'll add something like students implementation hyphen API. Okay, then there is some project location. If you want, you can change it or let it be as default. And it will ask, we can also select some the runtimes, but I'll keep it as by default for now. I have already downloaded 4.8.0 in my local, and also the Java 17 version is also configured in my local. So I left it everything as by default, and I'll create a project. So as soon as you create a project, you'll see that this window is now open in a separate tab, right? And you'll see a similar structure which we already saw for implement an API. So there we already saw that few flows were auto-generated, which were already created in RAML. But here we will not be able to see any flow created because this is something we'll be developing from the scratch. So as soon as you open this, you'll see a similar structure of the project. So I'll just give some time to let it open. All right. So here we have now. So on the left hand side, if you see, we have two options. The first option is start from AI, where we will use the Einstein AI to generate the flow automatically by giving some meaningful prompts. So we will see this option in the next upcoming session. But for today's session, we will go ahead and do the start from scratch option. And here we can generate a build a flow, or we can also click on the second option, which is build a subflow. Okay. And on the right hand side, if you see, we have an XML view of the same project. So let's click on the build a flow. And as soon as you do it, you'll see a similar window where on the left hand side, you'll see the flow details along with the exception handling, which is by default created. And on the right hand side, you'll see the XML view of the same. Okay. Now we will use a simple use case. So the use case is like we will use one get method, and we will use the endpoint as shown, which is student and display. And we will pass the name as a query parameter to this endpoint. And in the response, it will basically print you something like hello, Mr. and name. Okay, it's a simple one. So we'll have something like HTTP listener. Then we will also add a logger to log the message or to log the attributes in the console. And at the last, we'll use a set payload or maybe transform message component to display this message in the response payload. Okay. So coming to the project, first of all, we'll give a proper name to this flow. So I'll give it something like display name flow. Okay. Okay. So the name has been changed now. Our first component, that is HTTP listener. So click on the add component, search the HTTP here, and click on this listener component. Once this component is dragged into the palette, we'll first create the connector configuration. So we'll just give some meaningful names to it. Connection should be listener, HTTP protocol. I'll keep it as HTTP for now, the default one. I'll use the host as 0000, and the port I'll use it something like 802. Apart from this, I'll also add some base path /API, and I'll keep everything other configuration as a by default. Click on add. The connector is now configured, and let me now add the endpoint name. So let's use the same endpoint name, whatever we planned for, /student/display, and that's all. We are done. So the HTTP listener configuration is now configured properly. Let's now try to add another component, which is logger. And the main intention of adding this logger component is basically to list down all the attributes which are coming from the HTTP listener component. Okay, so I'll just print the attributes coming from the listener. That's it. We are done on the logger as well. And the last is we'll add the set payload component to print the required message in response. Okay, so let me add something like hello Mr. and attributes dot query params dot name. Okay, and if you see, the same has now been updated in the XML view as well. All it was a spelling mistake. So let me switch to the expression mode, and once I switch to the expression mode, I should see the respective updates in the XML view again. All right, that's it. We are done. So the first component was HTTP listener to accept all the HTTP request. The second one was logger to print the attributes which are coming from HTTP listener component. And the third component is we have used the set payload to print the respective message in the response. Okay, that's it. We are done. Now let me try to run and deploy this in my local system. So I'll just use run without debugging. All right, so let's wait for a few seconds and let this API be deployed in your local. It's almost done. All right, so it's now deployed if you see. And let me try to request this endpoint now from Postman. So I'll just add a request here. I don't have any request for now. Yeah, so HTTP 008082 port, and this will be the base path. This is the endpoint path, and the name is basically Prashant as a query parameter. I'll send it, and if you see, we are getting a proper response that is hello Mr. Prashant. Okay, and in the response as well, if you see, it has now printed all the attributes coming from the listener component. All right, so that's all for today's session. In our next session, we'll try to deploy this API in CloudHub 2.0, and we'll see how it behaves when it is getting deployed to CloudHub 2.0. All right, so thank you for watching.